this presentation is by Brad Feather from West Yorkshire Police, and he's talking around whether operational police officers should be authorised to carry and administer naloxone in the UK. So Brad, over to you.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me today. So I'm going to be talking to you about my research project, which examines whether operational police officers in the UK should be authorised to carry and administer naloxone. By the end of the presentation, I hope you'll have a clear understanding of what naloxone is and how it could impact modern day policing as a harm reduction measure. Next slide, please. So this will be the order of the presentation. So it's an introduction to what naloxone is, an overview and context of the research, then I'll go on to exploring the research themes in the dissertation, and the key findings, then on to the conclusions and recommendations that are made. Next slide, please. So briefly, I wanted to explain what naloxone is. So it is a drug that reverses opioid overdose. So it works by blocking opioids in the brain, restoring breathing and heart function within minutes with minimal side effects. So while naloxone can be injected, it is also available as a nasal spray. So it makes it simple, safe and easy to administer, even for non-medical professionals such as police officers. Next slide, please. So moving on to the context of the problem. So between 2011 and 2021, there were around 3,000 drug-related deaths per year in the UK. And the House of Commons has also reported that millions of people in the UK use drugs, with a significant number of those engaged in problematic opioid use. So at the same time, policing organisations remain the primary responders to drug-related harm, but we can't realistically eliminate drug use, and crucially, we're not reducing overdose deaths. Research by Fisher found that police officers often be first on the scene of overdose incidents, yet highlighted within government drug strategy reports. It explains that current harm reduction approaches are outdated. So this raises a key question of, are we doing everything we can to preserve life? Despite this, my main motivation for the research stems from my own operational experience. So during a shift, I attended an overdose incident and nothing we did was effective for the patient. But this was until the arrival of paramedics who administered naloxone. The reversal was immediate and it ultimately saved the patient. So that moment made me question why frontline officers don't have access to naloxone, and highlighted the value it could bring to me as a police officer and all other officers across the UK. Next slide, please. So to explore this issue, I focus on two research questions. So the first examined the current police responses to overdose incidents, looking at procedures, effectiveness and officer experience. And the second evaluated the ethical and proportionality-based considerations of introducing naloxone into policing. So next slide, please. Thank you. So on to research question one, what emerged was a consistent theme. Officers, like myself, often feel powerless when responding to overdose incidents. Research by Livingston stated that the preservation of lives lies at the heart of policing, but despite this, an interviewed officer described that they felt helpless upon arriving at the scene of an overdose, and they only described that they could only stand over the body of the patient and wait for paramedics to arrive. So studies highlight a lack of effective options at scene for officers. So data from the ONS shows that drug poisoning deaths have also increased every year since 2012, reinforcing that the current approach is not working. This is also supported by the Dame Carol Black review, which found that current harm reduction systems are not fit for purpose. Despite this, naloxone does present a clear opportunity to police forces across the UK. So the medication is legally permitted under Schedule 19 for the public administration. So this means it can be administered by anyone and supports its use in policing by people who aren't medical professionals. And then on to evaluating the effectiveness of it. Research by Hillen found that out of 325 police administrations, 317 of those were successful. So it demonstrates its high effectiveness rate and its life-saving potential. So overall, naloxone is both effective and operationally viable. Despite this, my research did discover that adoption across policing organisations remains inconsistent, and this can be due to things such as existing organisational biases that cause negativity, or organisations having greater senses of partnership working, which ultimately creates disparities in how the capability is delivered. Next slide, please. Then research question 2 explored the ethical and proportionality-based considerations of naloxone use within policing. So as we already know, the police are often the first to arrive at the scene of overdoses, and research shows that 95% of overdoses can be reversed using naloxone. So this highlights a clear advantage over current methods in use, such as CPR, when preserving life. In contrast to that, though, concerns surrounding legal liability were identified. So research suggests officers could face legal risks during adverse or ineffective administration. So although officers themselves have argued this point, saying that the risk is minimal compared to the existing tools that are in use, such as tasers, firearms, and all things surrounding use of force. In terms of the practicality, naloxone is easy to administer via the nasal spray. It requires minimal training and carries very low clinical risk, so there's no risk of like needle stick injuries, things like that. So that makes it highly employable. But in contrast, and to flip the argument on its head, we'll explore the drawbacks. So the research did highlight that naloxone may influence increased risk-taking behaviour by drug users. So while research by Macaulay notes that naloxone may create a magic bullet analogy, and the perception that normalises drug use amongst drug users. There are also questions around whether police are the appropriate agency to administer naloxone, as well as being the primary agency to enforce legislation relating to the misuse of drugs. And there is, of course, concerns surrounding increased demand on already stretched resources. Despite all this, under Article 2 responsibilities, if the police are first on scene, there is a clear duty to act, which supports naloxone as a proportionate and necessary tool to increase our operational effectiveness and to preserve life and protect the vulnerable. So overall, while challenges do exist, the evidence suggests naloxone is both ethically employable and operationally viable. Next slide, please. So overall, my research concludes that naloxone is highly effective and practical as a harm reduction tool, and it can be used successfully in policing. While some drawbacks do exist, the overriding factor is the police duty to preserve life, and evidence shows that naloxone is currently the most effective and advanced method to respond to opioid overdose. It also supports a more modern problem-solving approach to policing and enhances our ability to protect the vulnerable in critical situations. Despite this, it is important to recognise that naloxone is not a solution to drug misuse, it is a tool to save life. So for successful implementation, there must be greater consistency in training, policy and legal protections, especially to address concerns around liability and organisational perceptions. There are also wider considerations such as demand and the potential impact on core policing roles. And despite this, these challenges can be addressed through having effective policy, training and through partnership working. So ultimately, evidence suggests that naloxone is not just beneficial, but it could become a necessary tool in the preservation of life in modern day policing. Next slide, please. So based on the findings of the research, I propose several key recommendations. So firstly, naloxone should be issued to officers as part of standard PPE. Secondly, national training guidance and policy frameworks should be developed to support consistent and effective integration across all policing organisations. Thirdly, a formalised working agreement between police and ambulance services should be established, ensuring that medical response is maintained and the police don't become overburdened. In addition, officers should complete relevant referrals such as PPNs following the administration of naloxone to ensure individuals are directed towards ongoing support and rehabilitation services. And I believe that consideration should also be given to form legislation to safeguard officers from legal or misconduct proceedings when naloxone is administered correctly and in good faith. Furthermore, structured question sets should be introduced within district control rooms to capture key information, including patient symptoms and suspected drug use. So this would enable more effective triage, allowing incidents to automatically be flagged to dispatchers and attending officers where naloxone may be required. Finally, all incidents should be recorded and tagged, allowing for a national audit to evaluate the effectiveness of naloxone in policing contexts. Overall, these recommendations are intended to support the safe, consistent and effective implementation of naloxone across UK policing. Next slide, please. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure to present this to you, and if you have any questions, feel free, fire away.
Thank you very much, Brad. Beth, if you could pop your question into the Q&A, please. And likewise, Jessica. Okay, so just a couple of questions that are there already. Matt has asked, has there been any interest from your force in trialling this, Brad?
Yeah, so when I did my research, I didn't include it in the presentation. I did submit freedom of information requests. So at one stage they were doing a pilot. So I believe taser trained officers, when they renewed their taser permit, they were offered naloxone and trained on it if they wanted it. So I think some officers did take up on it, but at the time that I did my research, there'd been no administrations of it. But from research, there's quite a lot of forces that are jumping onto it now. So I know that North Yorkshire, I think they've got quite an extensive initiative going on where they're equipping most officers with it, and they've had quite a lot of success from that.
Okay, brilliant. And Annette, who was presenting earlier, said, I think this is awesome. The PSNI have just run a pilot schemes and some officers have been trained and equipped to administer it, mainly in the city areas. How confident do you think officers are in recognising an opioid overdose and administrating it in high pressure situations? Would you be confident, just from a personal view?
I totally see where you're coming from there. I mean, we're all first aid trained, or should be. You know, we have to recognise if someone's going into cardiac arrest, which it is very similar. So that I've put on there, know the signs of drug poison on the last slide. So that's 6 things that you could quite easily pick up on. However, if you did administer naloxone to someone who was in a different medical episode and they didn't need it, it wouldn't have any adverse effect. So it will just not work. But obviously then you'd have to look into why is it not working, and then that's when your initial first aid training will kick in, from my presumption.
Fabulous, thank you. And there aren't any other questions. I think the topic areas that other questions have asked you've covered really succinctly in your responses.